The first chapter of the popular manga Attack on Titan was published in Bessatsu Shonen magazine on September 9th, 2009, and the final chapter was published on April 9th, 2021, for a total of 139 chapters. Attack on Titan is a manga known for its great amount of foreshadowing. But did you know that there was a tremendous amount of foreshadowing just in the first chapter? Now that the series is finished, we looked for hidden foreshadowing in the first chapter, and found so much that it made us wonder what would have happened if the series had been cut short in the middle of the story. In this video, we're going to explain the hidden foreshadowing in the first chapter of Attack on Titan by looking at the whole story up to the final chapter. We'll look at the hints in the order that they appear in the first chapter, so it may be worthwhile to look at it again yourself as we go. Please be aware that this video contains spoilers up to the final chapter. The title of Chapter 1. Chapter 1's title, To You in 2,000 Years, is in direct contrast to the title of Chapter 122, From You 2,000 Years Ago. The protagonist Eren reveals that the You in Chapter 122 is referring to Ymir Fritz, the founder of the Titans, and that Ymir had been waiting for someone for 2,000 years. It seemed as though the person Ymir was waiting for was Eren, and that the You in the first chapter's title referred to him. But in the last chapter, it was revealed that the person Ymir had been waiting for was actually Mikasa, which surprised a lot of people. Rereading Chapter 1 with this in mind, it becomes more obvious that the You in the first chapter's title was referring to Mikasa, since the future Mikasa appeared in Eren's dream early on in the same chapter. The future Mikasa. As we just mentioned, at the beginning of Chapter 1, an adult woman appears and says the words, "See you later, Eren." Shortly afterwards, the child Eren wakes up. After Eren wakes up, he says, "Mikasa, when did your hair get so long?" Because of this, it was thought for many years that the woman he saw was Mikasa from the future, and in Chapter 138, it was proven that this was the case. In Chapter 138, Mikasa was fighting with Eren, the man that she loves, and when the stress of the fight became unbearable, she was hit by a severe headache. Immediately following this, there's a scene that seems to take place in another timeline, where Eren and Mikasa get to spend the rest of their time together. The events in the world in which Eren and Mikasa are fighting, and the world in which Eren and Mikasa are spending their time together, are depicted side by side. In the end, Mikasa beheads Eren in the world where they're fighting, while at the same time mumbling, "See you later, Eren," in the world where they're spending their time together. In other words, the scene Eren saw before he woke up in Chapter 1 turned out to be the words that Mikasa had told him just before he died in Chapter 138, meaning that this was a memory from the future. In the scene in the first chapter, when Mikasa says, "See you later, Eren," the page number was indicated as 13, but a few pages later in the manga, the number 845 was drawn in a panel. This 845 represents the current year in their world at the time of the first chapter. But by connecting the numbers 13 and 845 together, we can get the numbers 138 and 45 too, which actually led us to the scene on page 45 of Chapter 138, where Mikasa says, "See you later, Eren." Definitely a clever little setup. The meaning behind page 13. In the first chapter, the only page that had the page number indicated was page 13. But the number 13 was also related to the curse of Ymir, and is maybe the most important number in Attack on Titan. In Chapter 88, we find out that the heirs to the intelligent Titans, known as the 9 Titans, have a lifespan of 13 years left from the time that they receive their abilities, as the price for acquiring such mighty power. Also, the number of fingers that pointed at Ymir, the founder, to frame her for letting the pig escape in Chapter 122 was also 13. On top of that, on page 13 of Chapter 122, Ymir gains the power of the founding Titan, and then dies 13 pages later. Also, the main character Eren and his friends were in the 104th class of cadets, which is a multiple of 13. Erwin Smith, who was the leader of the Scouts, was the 13th commander, and 845, the current year at the beginning of the story, is also a multiple of 13. To go even further, Chapter 139, the final chapter of Attack on Titan, can be broken down into either 13 or 39, both multiples of 13. Adding 1, 3, and 9 together equals 13. And adding together the 4 and 9 from April 9th, the date that the final chapter was released, also equals 13. As you can see, the page number was only shown for page 13 to signify the importance that this number would have throughout the entire story. Eren's long dream. At the beginning of Chapter 1, after Mikasa from the future told Eren, "See you later, Eren," he wakes up and says, "I feel like I just had the longest dream." A similar scene is shown in Chapter 87, where Eren says, "I feel like I just woke up from the longest dream." No, not a dream, a memory. This means that without a doubt, the dream that he saw was a memory from the future. What Eren had seen in Chapter 1 was the last memory he has just before he's killed by Mikasa in Chapter 138. Incidentally, there's also a contrasting relationship between right after the dream scene in Chapter 1, where Eren's shedding a tear, and in Chapter 138, where Mikasa's the one who's crying. The reason why Eren's crying is never revealed, but maybe he was crying because that's the timing where Mikasa would be crying too in the future. The mark on the tree where Eren slept. In Chapter 1, there was a tree that Eren was leaning against while he was sleeping that had a crossed-shaped mark on it. Although it's hard to recognize it as foreshadowing, it's shown in the last chapter that this cross-shaped mark represented where Eren was going to be buried. Because the title of the final chapter, Chapter 139, is Moving Towards That Tree on the Hill, this tree was actually very important too, the number of tree boughs. If you look at the tree that Eren was leaning against in the first chapter, you'll see that it had 9 boughs coming from its trunk. Attack on Titan's author, Isayama sensei, has publicly stated that Attack on Titan is highly influenced by Norse mythology. Because of this, many people think that the tree that's shown in the first chapter may represent Yggdrasil from Norse mythology. Yggdrasil is a giant tree in Norse mythology that's called the World Tree. In Norse mythology, the world is divided into 9 worlds, centering around Yggdrasil. In light of this, it's thought that the tree in the shape of Yggdrasil that appears in the first chapter of Attack on Titan may represent the 9 Titans created by the founder Ymir, who had also divided her power into 9 parts. Trees are also used as important symbols in Attack on Titan. For example, in Chapter 96, when Reiner keeps running until he reaches a tree. If you're rereading the manga, you might want to pay attention to little details like this. The appearance of important characters. At the beginning of the first chapter, there's a young man with his hair parted to one side who's fighting the Titans. This turns out to be a young Commander Erwin, who is introduced later in Chapter 18. Also, in the scene where the scouts are returning in the first chapter, Instructor Keith Shaddis and a character that looks a lot like Mike are shown. The secret of Eren's father. In Chapter 1, Eren's father Grisha left us a hint by saying to Eren, "When I get back, I'll show you the basement that I've been keeping secret all this time." This secret was a mystery for a very long time, but everything that was in the basement was revealed to us in a number of chapters, starting from Chapter 85. In the basement were 3 books written by Grisha, which contained the truth about the world of Attack on Titan, including the existence of humans outside the walls, the secrets of the 9 Titans' power, and Grisha's own identity as a person from outside the walls. Also, if you look back at the scene in Chapter 1 where Grisha is saying to Eren, "I'll show you the basement," Grisha's actually looking in a strange direction. As it turns out, it's revealed in Chapter 121 to be because Grisha was looking in the direction of the future Eren, who was a young man going back through Grisha's memories with the power of the founding Titan. This is a very popular moment of foreshadowing in Chapter 1. because it's easy to understand, but at the same time, a very important revelation. The words at the beginning and end of Chapter 1. In the first chapter, Eren, Mikasa, and Armin look at the supersized Titan that suddenly appears, and these words are shown. On that day, the human race remembered the terror of being dominated by them, and the shame of being held captive in a bird cage. Then, Chapter 1 ends with the exact same sentence, as if to emphasize the point. This sentence turned out to be very important to the story. The first thing to note is that Armin also said, "I remember now," in the final chapter. It was hinted at back in the first chapter that memories are an important theme in Attack on Titan. Incidentally, it turns out that these lines in Chapter 1 were narrated by Armin in the anime. Eren was also killed by Mikasa in Chapter 138 and seemed as though he had been reborn as a bird in the final chapter. One idea I saw online was that they thought this was to show the difference between Chapter 1 and the last chapter. Eren was now free from the bird cage and appeared as a bird in the last chapter, in contrast to the words that were shown in Chapter 1, where it mentions the shame of being held in a bird cage. So, you can see that the first chapter was full of foreshadowing from beginning to end. If any of you has a favorite scene that foreshadowed later events, or any other interesting information, please feel free to comment. Thank you for watching. I hope to see you again in the next video.